Okay. So again, thank you very much for everybody for joining bright and early this morning. And I'm just going to take a quick peek at lesson number 4, and then we can go through and take a look at any questions anybody has. Let's take a look at that. So that is the discussion board that everybody will be going to for lesson 4. And you'll see that there are 2 main components here with the assignment that's due, and one is the microclimate map or microclimate assignment, and the other here is the mapping your current zones. So these are pretty straightforward, but let's take a look at some of the basic instructions. And it's always, again, a great idea before completing any of your assignments to take a look at the rubric. So again, here we can see everything that's been asked for within the assignment. And this is what I use to grade assignments. So if you're ticking all these boxes, then you're providing me with everything that I need to know in terms of your site. So with the microclimate assessment, it's really sort of dialing into your project site as best you can. And we're looking at things like sun and wind and moisture and other influences. We also want you to look at 5 different plants that are on your site and label those. And it's ideal if we can get, a tree or shrub or a mixture of plants, but that really does depend on your project site. For some people, there may not be any trees existing on their site at the moment. So just do the best you can. And again, we're looking for these sort of microclimate designations like open and sunny, could be shaded and moist, so shady and a moist understory. Could be windy, it could be exposed, it could be dry shade. We see that an awful lot in our work. So those are some of the examples that we're looking for. And then, of course, the plants are pretty straightforward. You want to pick 5 plants, and you want to be able to provide the botanical Latin name and the common name or the scientific name. And then, of course, your SWOT analysis. So I have an example here. Let me just try and find out. Okay. Just have to stop share, and we'll share this on the other screen. There we go. And this is an example of a past student. And these are accessible in that resource tab. If you want to see some examples, these can be super helpful in terms of what content that you want to make sure that you're including. So this student here did a few things. They did a sun shade map, so that's interesting. And then their actual microclimate map is here. And you can see they got pretty specific, where they have dry hills, they have mixed forest, they have mixed lower forests that are downhill, moderate plain, they have a flood plain. So some different items that were listed here. And then again, they go on to describe some of the plants that are found in these areas. So they've listed way more plants than we've asked them to do, but if that's what you feel like doing, then feel free. So that is one example of the microclimates. Yeah, we'll go back to our discussion board page. There we go. So again, if you do want to see any of the examples, you just go to the assignment resources, and you can see here, there's a link to student reports. And there's also a link here to microclimate plant identification chart. Now, I've not seen that before, so maybe I should open that up and just take a look at it. That's one of these things that okay, we'll just switch screen here and take a look at that one. There we go. So this is one of the suggested layouts that for your 5 plants. You have a photo, and then the genus species, which is the botanical Latin, and then the common name and the family. And on the second page here, there's a little bit of added information that we're looking for. So it's super helpful to go through this exercise, especially if it's actually quite amazing, even with plants that you don't think are edible or medicinal or useful at all. It's quite amazing to find out, just what's around us at all times, whether that's with ornamental plants or natives. And one really good resource I should show you here that I use quite a bit. Let me see here. We'll go back to too many windows open here. Oh, there we go. So one of the really interesting resources is Plants for a Future. And if you're ever wondering if a plant has any medicinal or, no, that's not quite the right window. You just search for it here. So let's say Douglas fir. That's a common. So there we go. It pops up on the list. And this is great because it gives us, all the info we want. We want the common name. We want the botanical name. Well, there's a family here. And then we get an edibility rating. And then we get the medicinal rating. So, and any other uses. Of course, there's a lot of other uses for fir. That's a major part of forestry in the Pacific Northwest. And then later on, you can go down the page here and it gives you lots of very useful information. And then I love this part where it gets into the edible uses, and we can see what parts of the plant are used for edible and for medicinal purposes. There's quite a bit of information packed into this website. It's quite amazing. And again, I'm surprised again and again with plants that I type into here and some of the information they've been able to collect from them. So one of the medicinal uses for Douglas fir, of course, which I've had, is Douglas fir tea, where you take the new shoots from new needles and you just blend a tea, make a tea out of it, add a little honey, and it's quite amazing if you're coming down with a cold. This is really quite a powerful tea. Lots of vitamin C, as you can see here. I don't quite believe it would be used as a coffee substitute. It's not that good. But if you're feeling a bug coming on, it's easy to access Douglas fir. And so we will go back one here. So there we go. So that's a little bit about the microclimate assessment. And I should just ask if anybody has any questions about that so far. See if anybody wants to chat. If you have any question as we go along here, don't hesitate to type something in the chat, or we can just turn on your mic, whatever works for you best. Let's see, and then you have your SWOT analysis. So here are some of the elements, again, that you want to look for. And I'll just get my spotlight tool here. So that's the first part of the assignment, and that's worth 10 points. And then we're going to look at mapping current zones, which is a very interesting exercise and really plays a big role in design, right? So it may take a little while to get the hang of this, but a lot of it is quite obvious. So let's say you had, let's say you have chickens and you're trying to place them within your landscape, trying to place a coop within your landscape. I'm sure after going through the content that Andrew's put together, which is fantastic, you'd realize that you would not want to put your chicken coop, say, far away from your home in a zone 4 or a zone 3. So you had to, you know, travel hundreds of feet to go get it, to go see them, to monitor them. Basically, with chickens, you're going to be wanting to probably visit them 3 times a day for letting them out, putting them away, and checking on eggs. So that's just one example. So there'll be a lot of elements that you're going to want to include in your design, and the placement, you'll want to really factor in your current zones in order to place those in a spot that's appropriate. So we have a question here from Janita. Janita, do you want to just fire up your mic or unmute yourself and
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had a preferred way you'd like the bibliography or the information. I know in the past with any images, we just copy and paste the URL, but when I look at the rubric and stuff, it mentions having a bibliography. And so I'm just wondering what you're hoping to see for that.
for myself, I'm not too concerned about how you put that together. That's really up to you. If you feel comfortable with something, really structured and thorough, I mean, I think you should go ahead and do that. If it's, yeah, from my perspective, I'm really dialing into the content that you're placing on your design, whether it be the microclimates or those zones. And sure, I'd like to see the source for some of the information, with the planting, but that it's, if we looked at, let me just see here. Yes, that sheet that I showed you, let me just bring it back here. You can see at the end it has
Yeah, I can
sources
see it there.
cited. So that's pretty easy, just copy and paste into that. But again, that's really up to the individual.
So is
And
there the possibility, I have a plant that is growing all over the ground on site, and I have tried to identify it using various tools and apps, and I am not getting anything clear. I know I could go to the OSU extension office that's nearby, but I was wondering, can we put it in there and just say, hey, can anyone identify that, in case people around here locally might know what it is?
sure, you could post it on the
Okay.
discussion board if you like.
Okay, great. Thank
I'm
you.
happy to take a look at it. That's one of my stronger suits. But yeah, somebody will know what it is.
Okay, thanks.
So it's a herbaceous plant, I'm gathering.
Yeah, it looks kind of like a mint type thing, but it smells horrific. And it's not like a whorehound, which is what it keeps coming up as. It's not like that at all. And so
Mm.
I haven't been able to identify it, but it stays more closer to the earth than all the descriptions have it growing pretty high, and that's not what it's doing.
Ah, okay. Well, yeah, post a picture. If you have a picture handy, you could we could share screen and throw it up on the,
Okay.
if if that's convenient for you.
Yeah, let me see if I can't figure that out while you're talking.
Okay, let
Thank
me
you.
go back to the assignment here. There we go. Um, Yeah, so current zones, very important. The other things that we want to factor in that play into your zone map. Well, of course, this is a standard for all design sheets. We want north arrow, a title, and your name, right? So most everyone has got a nice little title block that they're repeating with all the design sheets, and that's great. So thank you for that. Every part of the map you want to have designated as some zone. Okay, so there shouldn't be any large spaces that don't have any designation. I understand depending on the software you're using or whether you're doing this by hand, there may end up being little slivers of space, and don't worry about that too much. If you were presenting this to a client, you'd want to have that, eliminated. But for this exercise, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Just do your best to cover all of the map with some designation. And then, of course, you want to get a sense of the human interaction. So where people are traveling, the human pathways, including the car. It could be a bike. A lot of people don't have vehicles and they use a bike primarily. And the frequency and any gates and doorways. So if you really focus on including those, that'll give everybody a really good sense of the activities on your site. And I had a question about that, which I should open up here. So Mary asked a question about microclimates. And if there are two or more areas with similar microclimates that are separated by different microclimates, can similar ones share the same color? Oh yeah, if they're the same microclimate, absolutely. Let's say it's sunny and open, but in between there's a shaded area, absolutely. Right. They would be the same. And you could define that on the chart. Does that help you, Mary? I'm not sure if you have your mic on.
Thank you.
Okay. And then you had another question here, how to illustrate microclimates that sit on top of each other. So that's a really interesting question I've never had. So thank you for that. The deck and under a deck area. So my question to you would be, are you planning to utilize under the deck and as well as the deck surface itself?
I actually did this past summer. I used it to dry my garlic. It was the perfect place because it was windy and dark.
Right. Well, you know what I would do is, I mean, it's a pretty safe assumption that under a deck is going to be shaded. And given it's going to be for drying, yeah, I'm not actually sure how you would show that where it wouldn't be confusing. You know what you could do is indicate on the deck your polygon and the color that you've assigned to that microclimate, and even just do a little note, in that area that under deck is cool and dark, if you wish.
Thank you.
I've never had that come up, so, but obviously you really make use of that space. So that's one way of identifying it as being two different areas. And then you had one question here for zones. So some zones change depending on time of year. Absolutely, they do. Do we need to illustrate that? Well, you could make note of that in the text. So let's say I had a little kitchen garden, and during the winter, you may not be visiting it more than a couple times a week. And then during the growing season, you might be out there 2 or 3 times a day. So you could make a note of that within the label. You could say, say 1 or more times per day visitation during growing season. That would cover that off. And you can do that with labeling. So
Okay.
you don't have to draw a different color for that. So does that answer your questions, Mary? Or do you
Yes,
have any
yes.
other?
Thank you very much. No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Let us go back to that assignment. Yeah, we're on current zones here. So that, I don't know if we looked at, for example, here with zones. Let's do that. Oh, just trying to find it. There we are, microclimates. So you can see with the microclimates, this person went to a huge amount of work defining some of the main plants in these different areas. This is way more work than we would be asking for. We're just looking at 5 plants for the whole site. But this, this is a great exercise if you have the time. And here we go. So now we're on to zones. So I'll just point out one thing that I have seen quite a bit in the last couple of classes. And, zone 0, sure, you could put that in there. You don't have to. Zone 1 is very obvious. You're using this daily. And the same with zone 2 and 3. I think those are very, very obvious. And then the zone 4 is this outline area. And then I have been seeing people using, like placing a zone 5 designation in urban lots. And I would say that, my definition of a zone 5 is it's a wilderness area that's untouched and seldom visited. So that's pretty much not going to be the case for most urban locations. It is when we get into acreage, and it might if you're in an extremely unique setting. In fact, we had an installation project in this past spring that was this small urban lot backing onto a wooded park, right? So they, technically you could say just beyond the property is that zone 5, and you can show areas outside of the property boundary if you think that they are relevant. But do keep it in mind that zone 5 really is this untouched area that's not meant to be managed at all. And then here's a SWOT analysis. So that's great. And then next week is the big water week. So that's probably when we're going to have lots of questions appear on the Q&A because it's a big week in terms of getting a handle on watersheds, understanding water movement and how water moves through your site, and defining your larger watershed that your site's within, and then looking at your micro watersheds. So if we have time today, I might touch on that a little bit. Otherwise, we'll wait until we're deeper into it. And so, yeah, that is some of the examples that you can always reference. We will go back to the discussion board here, and I'll just basically that is what I was hoping to show everybody this morning. Yeah, so are there any questions that anybody has at this point? And it could be relating to assignment or lesson 4, and it could be any other week, something you've already gone through. I'm not sure, but we've got, better part of half an hour if anybody wants to make use of that time for whatever reason they want. And I understand if people are at a loss for questions at this point, that's no problem as well. So if anybody does have any questions here, you could just pop them in the chat or just unmute yourself. We can We can share screens. We can have you share screens and take a look at what you're doing if you have any questions at all about that. Yeah,
Jamie, I went ahead and put a picture of that plant on that discussion Q&A page.
sure. Yes. I think you could place a link. I'm not sure if you could place.
I wasn't sure how to do that. I tried to figure it out. I'm not that tech literate.
Well, let me just take a look here. I've never. You could put a Dropbox link or a Google Drive link. Let's see here. Yeah. Do you have it on your computer? Because
Yeah, I just put it on the question and answer Google document you had on the.
oh, okay.
I just went ahead and put the picture there because that was
There you go.
figured out.
Well, my initial thought is that looks like a plant called Lamium.
Lamium, which
Lamium.
isn't that of the mint family?
Oh, that's a very good question. Let's take a look. It might even be, not sure which species that's going to be, but we'll start here. Not a very good picture.
Those leaves seem to have more fingers, whereas this is more of a mint looking leaf. And it does have like a frosty white edge to it. This was taken when it was slightly damp outside, but it still maintains that frosty look even when it is dry. That's why I went kind of the route of the horehound, like the white horehound or the black horehound, but neither of those seem to kind of fit the bill, and the smell is quite atrocious.
Very strong, eh?
Yeah, and it's not like a minty anything in the family of a mint.
Not
It's
something you'd want to
horrible.
eat.
No.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's Lamium.
Okay.
Let me of course you're seeing it. Have you seen it flower yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay. We could yeah. You could read up on that. It could be Lamium album. That's what I would say.
Okay.
Not necessarily Lamium album, but I think it's a Lamium, and they are deer resistant. So the fact you're saying that, it has a strong odor, that points to deer resistance.
Okay.
And it looks like it's growing in an area that has quite a bit of, there's a fair amount of light, or?
It's all over the site, all over it. Light, shade, everywhere. It grows like a weed.
Wow. And how long have you been on your site? A few years?
No, since about the very end of August.
Okay. So
we
now,
haven't seen it really, and it was really dry, but this was still growing, which I was like, wow, okay, well, that's hardy.
yes.
And then it's been raining a lot more, but it's not gaining a lot of height, which is part of what was stumping me a little bit.
Yeah, and a lot of there are some. Have you noticed whether it is a clumping plant, or does it have any rhizomes? Does it look like it's?
Doesn't look like it has any rhizomes. I was kind of leaning towards something in the mint family because it looks like when it's mowed, it just kind of spreads and then takes root and then just keeps going. It's kind of what I was thinking. Everything that I was trying to identify, it made it sound like if you amend the soil, it doesn't like it. So it kind of goes away on its own.
I see.
But I kind of wanted to get an idea of what I was dealing with on if I should rip it out or avoid tilling.
Well, it's really funny you say that, because if you look at the soil around your plant, you have leaf litter, lovely to see. You've also got some chickweed. You've also got This is kind of an annual geranium. So what I think you're seeing is and we're going to get to that in lesson 6, I guess, when we start looking at soils and soil succession. So often, I tell you what, I'll bring up, this will make it, we are jumping ahead a little bit, but that's no big deal. Yeah, well, these are all good. This is basically what happens with soils and around our so-called development. So when we build a house, when we take out trees, when whatever it be, we're not so much taking out trees, unless we have a machine in there disturbing. But what happens is, let's say somebody does some logging, builds a home, in those areas of disturbance, you start to get a response typically of annual weeds, right? And the soil wants to heal itself, and it wants to grow old growth forest again. That's basically just about every part of the world wants to be forest. So it starts moving in that direction. So the annual weeds come in first. They're going to have very little root. They're going to appear, flower quickly, and die. And that foliage becomes organic, an organic matter for the soil. And so it starts building soil capacity a little bit. And then it moves up. And then we get more different types of annuals with some perennial grasses. And this succession continues until we're back into old growth forest. So often when we have problems in the landscape, well, we'll call this plant a problem, going and ripping them out of the ground, let's say you had a small area and you wanted to get rid of them. And if you went and ripped them out of the ground and you did nothing else, so you didn't follow up with anything, and you came back 6 months later, you'd probably discover that they're reappearing. They want to come back. They want to heal the soil here. And I'm not suggesting that, you should be leaving them, but often if we have early succession soils and we want to move them up, so we say we wanted to put trees and shrubs here, their requirements are very different. So their fungal bacterial ratio is a lot different than down here, right? So disturbed soils are very fungal dominant, and then undisturbed old growth is the opposite. It's very fungal dominant and very little bacteria.
So when you do a cover crop, what category does that fall in? Is that more like where the second slot is as far as with its like weeds, or does a cover crop kind of accelerate the process?
Yeah. If you're putting a cover crop down, you're doing that intentionally, and you're trying to build or shift your soils and add organic matter or whatever your strategy is. You're going to be right in this sort of middle area.
Okay.
Right. So, and when you get to the grasses and perennial zone, so right at the end of the pioneer going into intermediate, that's when you're going to have lots of success with things like strawberries and artichoke, and so those plants that need those various populations of soil organisms. And without going down too deep a rabbit hole, we're in week 6, or sorry, I keep saying week because that's what we used to be. It's lesson 6. When we go into that, we're going to be looking at the mineral contents of your soils with jar tests. And that's a really important step to go through. But an equally important step is actually what is alive in that soil. And when we look at this is the life, right? And this, the fungal and bacterial ratios and the elements are what drives the nutrient cycle within the soil. They are responsible for cycling nutrients, not your sand, silt, and clay. They're just, that's just like a homestead,
Okay.
right? Same with organic matter. You're not going to grow any plants with cow manure. That plant won't know what to do with it. It needs to be broken down by other organisms. Of
Okay.
course, cow manure is a beautiful product. It's just, it's not readily, it has to be plant available. So that is a little bit of a snapshot there. So that, long story short, when we look at your photo, we can tell that there's been, there's early succession activities going on here.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
that's not good or bad. It's just that may explain why you're getting, this sort of response.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So we've gone through the microclimate assessment and the zones. So is there any questions at all that people might have about anything they've encountered, or wondering about anything graphical? Because really, I'm sure you'll see this or have seen it so far, is when we get into these maps, they're really two components. They are the aesthetics of the graphics, and then there's the actual content, the creative content coming from you. So that's where, both are important. You could have some excellent design ideas, but if they can't be articulated graphically, it makes it really difficult for others to understand them. And ultimately, if you have a client that you're presenting ideas to, you want to try and do your best to get your idea across. So there's this kind of two parts to the design process that one has to constantly work on. And even, for myself, I've been doing this a long time, but I'm always looking at ways to improve the graphical presentation of a drawing, as well as learning more about the design process. Right now, I'm taking a farm scale design course. I've actually been taking it over the past year. It's going into its second year now, and I just kind of drop in and out of it when I have time. But it's just one of those things. I'm fascinated by that whole process. And when you get to larger scale land development, it is a slightly different. It can be a slightly different approach versus just the structure that we're seeing here with permaculture design process. It's sort of a next step. So yeah, so anybody who's really going to dive down the rabbit hole with permaculture design, you'll probably find as time goes on, you'll see other things that'll greatly interest you, and you'll want to learn more and more about them. I mean, you could spend most of your life just learning about all of these various things, and just soil on itself by itself. You could spend years and years and years of research on that. And that's another thing I took some training in, and yeah, it never ends. It's great. And sort of being more of a generalist rather than a specialist, I think leans really well into the making yourself a better designer if you have a good idea of a lot of different things, but it takes a lot of time to get there. So but I look at how I started out in the industry, and how, let's say, the opportunities you guys have in terms of this course. And I think, I could have saved myself probably a decade if I'd had this sort of this format of instruction and the content. So it's a great opportunity. If for not only designing your own homestead, but if you want to look beyond that and try and help other people out. Okay, so does anybody have any other questions or want to chat about anything? I'm got 20 minutes here, and we can treat that any way you wish. If you don't, then we can call it an early day. So it's entirely up to everybody here. Give you a couple seconds to think about that if you like. Alrighty. Well, I guess we have covered everything we need to today, and want to thank everybody for taking the time to be part of the meeting. And we will look forward to seeing your assignments next week. Everybody's I must say, the level of, there's a couple of things I want to say. One is that I've noticed as an instructor, when we have the 10-week course, we have, if I started with 20 students, I might end the course with 12 or 13. So there's a fairly high dropout rate. And when I say dropout, people just don't have the time and energy to complete, and they'll redo the course at a later date often. But with this particular course, because it's 20 weeks and we get to answer questions, it's better feedback for most people. We're keeping the retention rate it's way up there. So that's great to see. The more people that learn about permaculture design, the better, and in my estimation, especially with what's going on in the world, it's doesn't really matter where you look. It's pretty unsettling, whether it's climate or socially. So yeah, that's great to see. Everybody's as well. The quality of the assignments is really high. So I tip my hat to everybody that is submitting assignments. They've been really top quality, especially given the rudimentary software that most people are using. So thank you very much for that. It makes my job a whole lot easier. It's refreshing to look at a drawing that is really easy to understand. So that's been great. Yeah, so if anybody and nobody has any more questions, I guess we'll call it a day, and I will post this recording on the discussion board, and then we'll see you next, we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. And I'm sure that with lesson 5, we're going to have a great interaction in terms of finding out a little bit more information about watersheds and a few things about your water design for your project site. That'll be nice to go over. But in the meantime, you have a great week, and take care.